Hi and Assalamualaikum. My name is FIN323 bin Abdul Halim from class BA 1194B. My student ID is 2020901537. Today I would like to explain about export factoring. Without wasting any time, let's move to the explanation. Export factoring is a complete financial package that combines export working capital financing, credit protection, foreign accounts receivable bookkeeping, and collection services. A factoring house or factor is a bank or a specialized financial firm that performs financing through the purchase of invoice or account receivable. Export factoring is offered under an agreement between the factor and exporter, in which the factor purchases the exporter's short-term foreign accounts receivable for cash at a discount from the face value, normally without resources. Next, we move to the applicability, risk, pros and cons. For the applicability of export factoring, it is best suited for an established exporter who wants to have the flexibility to sell on open account terms to avoid incurring any credit losses or to outsource credit and collection functions. And for the risk of non-payment inherent in an export sale is virtually eliminated. For the pros, eliminates the risk of non-payment by foreign buyers and maximize cash flows. And for the cons, they are more costly than export credit insurance and generally not available in developing countries. How do export factoring work? Let's get to the answer. Firstly, the exporter signs an agreement with the export factor who selects an import factor through an international correspondent factor network. The import factor then investigates the foreign buyer's credit standing. Once credit is approved locally, the foreign buyer places orders for goods on open account. Then exporter then ships the goods and submits the invoice to the export factor, who transfers it to the import factor. The import factor then handles the local collection and payment of the accounts receivable. During all stages of the transaction, records are kept for the exporter's bookkeeping. I will give an example on how export factoring works based on Trade-Wind Finance organizations. There are three ways that Trade-Wind Finance conducts export factoring for business. The first is on open account terms, the second is via payment against documents, and the third is via letters of credit. These methods are all designed to lower financial risk for buyers and suppliers, maximize access to working capital, and minimize credit risk. For the open account terms, Trade-Wind analyzes the credit worthiness of a buyer and then sets a reasonable credit limit with them. Then, they purchase a company's account receivable and pay up to 95% of the invoice amount. This usually occurs between 24 and 48 hours of the submission of the invoice to accelerate access to working capital. In agreement with open account terms, Trade-Wind handles the account receivable and manages the buyer's payment for a supplier's invoice. When this invoice matches, they pay the remainder of the supplier if the buyer is unable to pay the invoice upon maturity or becomes insolvent. Trade-Wind will still pay the remainder of the invoice as a non-recourse payment. In brief, the supplier sends goods to the buyer and the finance company advance payment to the supplier. The buyer then pays the finance company what they owe when the invoice matches. The second one, via payment against documents, an international trade finance company like Trade-Wind will advance funds to a company and handle the bank collections process. First, a shipment of goods is sent from the supplier to the buyer. The supplier sends documents to the finance company, and upon acceptance of the documents, they will advance payment to the supplier. Trade-Wind then sends the documents to the buyer's bank, and when the terms are accepted by the buyer, documentation is sent to the buyer and payment is submitted to the finance company, completing the transaction. Lastly, via letter of credit, a buyer places an order with the supplier. then opens a letter of credit with the finance company. A letter of credit guarantees the supplier is paid if the terms and conditions specified are met. Then the supplier will ship the goods to the buyer. The supplier is paid by the finance company, and they in turn collect payment from the buyer based on the conditions laid out in the letter of credit. Who can use the export factoring? Trading or manufacturing companies or entrepreneurs that deliver goods or provide services to most of the countries in the world. The deliveries are regular, accounts receivable are before their due date, goods are delivered on an open account credit terms without securing by any bank instrument. There is no third party right to the accounts of receivable. There is a contractual relation between the supplier and the buyer. We just arrived at the end of the explanation. Thank you for watching and listening.